They unleashed hell. Humans responded with, finally a reason to get real. The stars above Mars burned cold and distant, indifferent to the screams that would soon echo through the thin red air. On the surface of the fourth planet from Sol, life had taken root in fragile domes and pressurized tunnels. Human life, stubborn and hopeful. Colonists grew crops under artificial suns, raised children who had never seen Earth's oceans, and dreamed of a future where Mars was more than a frontier. It was home. That dream ended in fire. Without warning, without declaration, the Cathar hegemony struck. Their warships, sleek obsidian vessels bristling with plasma cannons, slipped past the outer sensor nets like shadows. They didn't hail. They didn't negotiate. They simply opened fire. 3 colonies, New Haven, Ares Prime, and Redstone, vanished in blinding flashes of violet energy. Atmosphere domes shattered. Oxygen ignited. People turned to ash before they could even understand what was happening. In less than an hour, over 12,000 souls were gone. The hegemony had watched humanity for decades. They saw a species divided, nations bickering over resources, ideologies clashing in endless debates, governments paralyzed by bureaucracy. To the Cathar, humans were loud, emotional, and chaotic. Not a threat, barely worth noticing. Their High Overseer Vraktol had called them a swarm of insects playing at civilization. He believed a swift, brutal strike would shatter their spirit. He expected surrender, or at least silence. He was wrong. Deep beneath the granite bones of Cheyenne Mountain, in a command bunker built during a different age of fear, Captain Daniel Brooks stood before a wall of flickering screens. His uniform was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot from a double shift, but his posture was rigid. On every screen, the same image repeated: burning domes, drifting debris, emergency beacons blinking out one by one. The casualty count climbed faster than the system could update. Lisa Grant, his tactical officer, stood beside him, arms crossed, jaw tight. She had family in Ares Prime, a younger brother. She hadn't spoken in 10 minutes. No one had. Brooks turned slowly, his boots clicking on the metal floor. He looked at Grant, then at the others in the room, engineers, comms officers, junior lieutenants, all frozen in shock. For weeks, the United Earth Defense Coalition had argued over budget cuts, protocol updates, and whether their aging fleet could even reach Mars in time to matter. Now the question was gone, replaced by something far simpler. He walked to the center of the room where the main console hummed softly. He placed a hand on it not for drama, but because he needed to feel something solid. Then he spoke, voice low but clear. "They unleashed hell," he said. "Finally a reason to get real." The words hung in the air like a spark in dry grass. Within minutes, the bunker came alive. Orders flew. Secure all orbital defense grids. Activate dormant AI cores. Recall all off-duty personnel. Scramble the Luna intercept squadrons. The old emergency protocols, long dismissed as relics of paranoid Cold War thinking, were dusted off and executed with machine-like precision. No debates. No committees. Just action. Across Earth, similar scenes unfolded. In Houston, engineers rerouted power from civilian grids to military launch pads. In Nairobi, cyber defense teams began flooding hegemony comms channels with noise, buying time. In Beijing, shipyards that had been idle for years lit up as crews rushed to refit old freighters into armed escorts. Even the Belt, home to miners and drifters who rarely cared about Earth politics, sent word. "We're in." The hegemony expected panic. Instead, they got purpose. Back in Cheyenne Mountain, Brooks reviewed the first full scan of the attack zone. The enemy fleet hadn't lingered. They'd struck and vanished, confident their message was received. Arrogant. That was their first mistake. Their second would be underestimating what humans did when they stopped arguing and started working together. Grant finally spoke. "They think we'll beg," she said, voice rough. "Or hide," Brooks nodded. "Let them think that." He pulled up a schematic of the Sol system. Mars was a wound. But Earth, Luna, the Jovian shipyards, they were still intact. And now they were awake. He tapped a command into the console. A single line of code buried deep in the Coalition's archives activated. Designation Iron Resolve. It wasn't a weapon. It was a signal. A trigger that told every military and civilian asset in human space: stand ready, unify, defend. From the Arctic to the equator, from orbital stations to deep-sea research labs, systems blinked online. Drones powered up. Railgun turrets rotated toward the sky. AI cores, long limited by ethical firewalls, received new parameters. Protect human life at all costs. No one celebrated. There was no time. But a quiet shift had occurred. The scattered, squabbling species the hegemony had mocked was gone. In its place stood something harder, sharper, united not by ideology but by loss, and by resolve. High Overseer Vraktal received the initial after-action report aboard his flagship, the dreadnought Vorlag. Human colonies neutralized, the report read. No significant resistance detected. He allowed himself a thin, kittenous smile. Let the insects mourn, he thought. By the time they looked up, the hegemony would already control the inner systems. He did not know that at that very moment, a technician in Reykjavik was loading the last batch of fusion cores onto a stealth corvette. He did not know that a retired pilot in Buenos Aires had just volunteered to train cadets in zero-G combat. He did not know that a young girl in Mumbai, watching the news with tears in her eyes, had whispered to her little brother, "Don't worry, we'll make them pay." The hegemony saw weakness. Humans saw a reason, and reasons once found are hard to ignore. Brooke stepped out of the command center for a moment into a narrow corridor lined with emergency lights. He leaned against the cool stone wall and closed his eyes. He thought of his daughter, safe in Colorado, too young to understand war but old enough to ask why the sky looked angry tonight. He opened his eyes. The red alert lights pulsed like a heartbeat. "All right," he said to no one. "Let's get real." Inside the bunker, the work continued. Not with rage, not with fear, but with a terrible, focused calm. Humanity had been pushed, and for the first time in generations, every hand reached for the same tool. Not a plea, not a prayer, a weapon. News of the Martian massacre spread faster than any signal had a right to travel. It wasn't just on official channels or military comms. It was in every home, every school, every public screen from Oslo to Jakarta. People didn't scream. They didn't riot. They got quiet, then they got to work. On Earth, factories that once made household robots and entertainment drones switched production overnight. Conveyor belts that rolled out coffee makers now carried railgun coils. Engineers who designed luxury shuttles redrew blueprints for armored hulls. In Detroit, a group of auto workers volunteered to retrofit old cargo haulers with missile pods. In Seoul, university students stayed up for days straight, coding new targeting algorithms on borrowed servers. No one asked for permission. No one waited for orders. They just did what needed doing. Even politics changed. Senator Paul Dawson, known for blocking every defense bill for years, stood before the Global Assembly and said simply, "We were wrong." Governor Maria Ruiz, his longtime rival, nodded from the front row. Within hours, they signed a joint emergency act that gave the United Earth Defense Coalition full authority over all civilian and military assets. No debates, no delays. Just unity. Out in the asteroid belt, far from the noise of Earth, Commander Nate Ruiz watched the news feed with a bitter taste in his mouth. He wasn't related to the governor, but he shared her last name and her stubbornness. He stood on the bridge of the UNS Harrier, a ship that had once hauled ice from Ceres to Luna. Now it bristled with scavenged weapons and patched-together shields. His crew wasn't made of soldiers. They were ex-miners, mechanics, a few ex-mercenaries with clean records, and a handful of cadets who'd never fired a live round. But they'd all lost someone on Mars. That was enough. "Reckoners ready," said Lena Torres from the engineering bay. She was young, barely 30, but she'd built the ship's new AI targeting system from spare parts and old hegemony data drives recovered from a derelict scout ship. She called it Reckoner because, as she put it, it doesn't forgive. "It just counts," Nate nodded. "Run the final test." The Harrier drifted near a dead comms satellite long abandoned. On-screen, Reckoner marked the target. Calculated wind shear from solar flares. Adjusted for microgravity drift. Then, with a soft hum, the ship's main turret fired. A tungsten slug no bigger than a man's arm shot forward at Mach 12. It struck the satellite dead center. Not a glancing blow. A clean kill. The crew didn't cheer. They just exchanged looks. This wasn't a game anymore. 2 days later, a hegemony scout squadron, 3 light frigates, entered the outer belt, scanning for human activity. They assumed the belt was empty, lawless, unorganized. They were wrong. Nate's fleet, 5 converted mining tugs and 2 refitted cargo haulers, hid in the shadow of a nickel-iron asteroid. Reckoner guided them silently, using the asteroid's magnetic field to mask their heat signatures. When the hegemony ships passed within range, Nate gave the order. Fire. The first volley took out the lead frigate's engine core before its shields could even power up. The second frigate tried to turn, but Reckoner had already predicted its evasion P. 3 slugs punched through its bridge. The third ship fled, but not fast enough. A drone launched from the Harrier latched onto its hull and detonated its plasma core. The whole fight lasted less than 4 minutes. Afterward, Nate stood on the bridge, staring at the drifting wreckage. No human lives lost, 3 enemy ships destroyed. It wasn't revenge. It was a message. Back on Earth, the victory was broadcast not as propaganda but as proof. Proof that humans could fight, that they could win. Recruitment centers overflowed. Not just soldiers, engineers, medics, pilots, even cooks and medics signed up. People donated food, fuel, spare parts. A farmer in Nebraska sent his entire grain harvest to military logistics. A tech billionaire in Singapore gave his private fleet of shuttles to the cause. No press tours. No interviews. Just action. In a hidden lab beneath Geneva, Dr. Owen Pierce and his team worked around the clock. They'd recovered fragments of hegemony plasma weapons from the Martian ruins. Now they were reverse engineering them. Not to copy, but to understand. Their tech is advanced, Owen told his team, but it's rigid, predictable. Humans? We adapt. Meanwhile, on Luna, Captain Daniel Brooks reviewed new fleet deployments. The old guard had wanted to wait, to build more ships, to train longer. But Brooks knew time was the one thing they didn't have. We fight with what we have, he told his staff. Not what we wish we had, so they did. Old freighters became missile carriers. Passenger liners turned into hospital ships. Even civilian satellites were reprogrammed to jam enemy sensors. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't perfect. But it was human. The hegemony noticed. Patrol reports came back confused. Human resistance was supposed to be scattered, weak. Instead, it was everywhere. Coordinated. Ruthless. High Overseer Vraktol dismissed the early losses as minor setbacks. But doubt crept in. His advisors whispered about strange tactics. Ships appearing where they shouldn't. Weapons hitting with impossible accuracy. Humans fighting not for territory, but for something deeper. Something they couldn't measure. On Ceres, Nate Ruiz stood beside Lena Torres as they loaded the last of the tungsten slugs into the Harrier's magazine. They think we're just reacting, he said. Lena wiped grease from her hands. Let them think that. While they're watching the front door, we'll be coming through the walls. Back on Earth, a little boy in Lagos asked his mother why the stars looked different now. She didn't tell him about war. She told him, because we're finally looking back. And they were. Not with fear, not with hate, but with eyes wide open, hands steady, and hearts set on one thing, making sure no one ever hurt them like that again. The galaxy had seen humanity cry. Now it would see them rise. The hegemony believed Jupiter was theirs for the taking. The gas giants' moons held the largest human shipyards in the outer system. Vast orbital docks where freighters, colony ships, and even old defense cruisers were built and repaired. To the Cathar, capturing those yards meant cutting off humanity's ability to rebuild. It was a clean, strategic move. They sent their best. 2 dreadnoughts, 5 heavy cruisers, and a swarm of fighter escorts. They expected little resistance. After all, the yards were civilian, unarmed, defenseless. They were wrong. Admiral Carol Jenkins had known they would come. She'd spent the last 6 weeks turning the Jovian shipyards into a trap. Not with big guns or flashy shields, but with silence. With patience. With something the hegemony had never seen before. Deep beneath the icy crust of Europa, hidden in tunnels carved by old mining drills, Project Ironclad waited. There wasn't a single weapon. It was a network, hundreds of small, autonomous drone platforms, each no bigger than a shuttle, powered by stolen hegemony plasma cores and guided by a decentralized neural mesh trained on every major human battle in history. From Thermopylae to the Pacific War, from orbital skirmishes to ground invasions, the system had learned how humans fought. Not with brute force, but with cunning, with sacrifice, with timing. The drones had no pilots, no voices, no fear. They only had one command: protect human life. As the hegemony fleet entered the Jovian approach zone, their sensors showed nothing unusual. The shipyards looked quiet. A few maintenance bots drifted near the outer rings. No warships, no energy spikes, just empty space and cold metal. High Overseer Vraktol watched from his flagship, the Vorlog, now repaired after its earlier losses. He gave the order. Begin bombardment, plasma cannons charged. Fighter wings launched. The dreadnoughts moved into position. Then Europa cracked open. Not with an explosion, but with a slow, deliberate split in the ice. From the fissures, hundreds of drones rose like blackbirds waking from sleep. They moved in perfect silence, no radio chatter, no engine roar, just smooth, coordinated motion. The hegemony sensors barely registered them at first. Too small. Too quiet. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. The drones didn't attack the fighters. They ignored them completely. Instead, they targeted the dreadnought's shield emitters, the weak points where energy flowed in pulses. Reckoner, now linked to Ironclad's network, calculated the exact millisecond each emitter would cycle. One by one, the drones fired micropenetrators, tiny darts of compressed tungsten that slipped through the gaps in the shields like needles through cloth. The first dreadnought lost power in 3 seconds. Its lights went dark. Its weapons froze. The second tried to retreat, but drones swarmed its engine vents, overloading the plasma conduits from the inside. It tore itself apart in a silent burst of fire. The hegemony fighters, confused and leaderless, scattered. But human ships were waiting. Not from the shipyards, from the shadow of Ganymede. Captain Daniel Brooks had moved his fleet there days earlier, betting everything on Jenkins' plan. Now his cruisers emerged, railguns blazing. The fight wasn't fair. It wasn't meant to be. 17 minutes later, it was over. Not a single human ship was lost. The hegemony lost both dreadnoughts, 3 cruisers, and nearly all their fighters. The rest fled into the void, broken and burning. On the bridge of the UNS Resolute, Brooks didn't smile. He just nodded. Good work, Carol. Admiral Jenkins, watching from her hidden command post under Europa's ice, exhaled for the first time in hours. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. They thought we'd meet them head-on, she said to her aide. We met them where they weren't looking. Back on Earth, the news spread fast. Not as a victory, but as a warning. The hegemony now knew humans didn't just fight back. They planned. They waited. They turned weakness into weapon. President Alan Ford stood before the Global Assembly that evening. He was tired. His suit was wrinkled. But his eyes were clear. We didn't ask for this war, he said. But we'll finish it. No grand speeches. No promises of glory. Just truth. In the belt, Nate Ruiz watched the battle footage on a cracked screen. He saw the drones move like a single mind. He saw the hegemony ships fall like stones. He turned to Lena Torres. We're not just surviving anymore, he said. No, she replied. We're winning. On Mars, cleanup crews began the grim work of recovering bodies. They worked in silence under red skies, but now they carried sidearms. Not for fear, but for respect. For readiness. The hegemony tried to spin the loss. Vraktol called it a temporary setback caused by primitive sabotage. But in private, his hands trembled as he reviewed the drone attack patterns. There was no randomness. No error, only precision. And that scared him more than rage ever could, because rage could be crushed. Precision could not. On Luna, Lisa Grant updated the defense grid. Every system now ran on a mix of human intuition and AI prediction. No more waiting for orders. If a threat appeared, the grid would respond instantly. She thought of her brother gone in the first strike. She didn't cry. She just typed faster. In Nairobi, cyber teams began feeding false data into hegemony scout probes. Fake coordinates, empty fleets, phantom bases. Let them chase ghosts while real humans built real weapons. In Houston, engineers tested a new railgun design that could fire from orbit and hit a target the size of a door on Earth's surface. It worked on the first try. The galaxy was learning a new truth. Humanity wasn't loud because they were weak. They were loud because they refused to disappear. And now they had teeth. High Overseer Vraktol stared at the star map in his war room. Saul's system glowed red, no longer a prize but a threat. He wanted to order another attack. But for the first time, he hesitated. What if they were ready again? What if they were always ready? He didn't know that beneath Europa's ice, Admiral Jenkins was already building the next phase of Ironclad. Or that on Ceres, Nate Ruiz was training a new squadron of drone pilots. Or that in a small town in Ohio, a teenager was building a signal jammer from old phone parts. Just in case. The hegemony had come to teach humanity a lesson. Instead, humanity was teaching them one. And the lesson was simple. Never mistake quiet for weakness. Never mistake grief for surrender. And never ever give humans a reason to get real, because once they did, there was no going back. The hegemony was running out of options. Their fleets were battered. Their supply lines stretched thin across light years. Morale, once unshakable, now flickered like a dying lamp. High Overseer Vraktol knew a direct assault would fail, so he chose something darker, something cruel. He ordered the release of the Xylos Plague, a bioengineered pathogen designed to attack human DNA, shutting down immune systems within hours. It wouldn't kill quickly. It would make them suffer. It would break their spirit. They released it near Titan. The moon's terraforming domes housed over 8,000 scientists, engineers and support staff, people working to turn Saturn's largest moon into a new home. The plague came in silent canisters drifting down from a cloaked hegemony vessel. It seeped into the air recyclers, spread through vents. Within minutes, people began coughing, then collapsing, then dying. But the hegemony had made one fatal error. They assumed humans would panic. They didn't know Dr. Owen Pierce and Lena Torres were already on Titan. Pierce had been studying alien biology since the first Martian attack. He'd warned that the hegemony might use bioweapons, so he'd prepared. In a sealed lab beneath Dome 7, he and Lena had built a mobile pathogen lab from spare parts and old medical drones. When the first symptoms appeared, they were ready. They isolated the virus within an hour. It was complex, woven with synthetic proteins that targeted human cellular repair mechanisms. But it had a flaw. The hegemony had built it to ignore their own biology. That meant it carried a genetic signature unique to Cathar physiology. Lena's eyes lit up when she saw it. "We can turn this against them," she said. Pierce didn't hesitate. "Do it." For 3 days and nights, they worked without sleep. They stripped the plague of its human targeting code and rebuilt it to attack hegemony cybernetic implants instead. The new version wouldn't kill organic tissue, but it would scramble neural links, overload power cores, and fry command circuits inside their warships. It was no longer a weapon of terror. It was a scalpel. They called it Mirror. While they worked, Captain Daniel Brooks prepared the delivery system. Stealth drones, small, silent, and nearly invisible to sensors, were loaded with aerosolized Mirror. Piloted by volunteers from the Belt, they launched from hidden bays on Enceladus. Their mission: infiltrate hegemony barracks, supply depots, and command vessels near the edge of the Sol system. The first drone reached a hegemony forward base orbiting Neptune. It slipped through a maintenance hatch, released its payload, and vanished. Within hours, chaos erupted. Soldiers collapsed as their neural implants shorted out. Shipboard AI systems went dark. One cruiser lost all power and drifted into the gas giant's pull. Vraktol received reports of mysterious system failures. He ordered full decontamination. But Mirror wasn't a germ. It was a ghost in their machines. And it was spreading. At the same time, Brooks had another plan. The hegemony's main relay station, their communication hub for the entire invasion force, orbited beyond Pluto, hidden in the Kuiper Belt. If it fell, their fleets would be blind, cut off from command. But attacking it head-on was suicide. So Brooks chose deception. He took command of a captured hegemony scout ship, salvaged after the Europa battle. Its hull was patched, its ID codes rewritten. A small crew, just 10 volunteers, boarded it. Among them was Lisa Grant. She knew the risks. She didn't care. They flew for 12 days, silent and dark, mimicking hegemony patrol patterns. When they reached the relay station, they transmitted forged clearance codes. The station's AI, already weakened by Mirror's early spread, accepted them without question. Inside, the team moved fast. They planted shaped charges on the core reactor and main antenna array. No alarms sounded. The hegemony guards, sluggish from implant malfunctions, never saw them coming. As they retreated to their ship, Lisa paused. She looked back at the massive station, spinning slowly against the black. "This is for Ares Prime," she whispered. Then they launched, The explosion lit up the outer system like a second sun. The relay station didn't just break, it shattered. Fragments scattered across millions of kilometers. Every hegemony ship within 20 light hours lost contact with command. Orders stopped. Resupply halted. Coordination collapsed. Back on Earth, Admiral Carol Jenkins watched the data stream in. "They're blind now," she said. Nate Ruiz, patrolling near Sedna, grinned. "Let's make them deaf too." His fleet began jamming all remaining hegemony frequencies with noise, random signals, old music, children's voices reading poetry. Not to confuse. To haunt. On Titan, Pierce and Lena watched as the last of the human plague victims recovered. The antidote worked. No one else died. They sat in silence for a moment, exhausted but alive. "They tried to break us with fear," Lena said. Pierce nodded. "We broke them with science." In the hegemony flagship, Vractol stared at his dead comms screen. His hands clenched. His implants buzzed with warning pings he couldn't silence. For the first time, he felt truly alone. His fleet was scattered. His weapons failing. His enemy, once dismissed as insects, had turned his own tools against him. He wanted to rage. To order a final desperate charge, but his ship's systems flickered. Lights dimmed. The AI voice stuttered. He was losing control, and he knew why. Humans didn't just fight with guns and ships. They fought with minds, with will. With the quiet, relentless belief that no horror was too great to overcome. The hegemony had unleashed hell. But humans had spent centuries learning how to walk through fire. Now, they were lighting their own, and the galaxy would burn with them. The war ended not with a treaty, not with a grand speech, but with silence. The hegemony's remaining ships, battered, broken, and blind, turned away from the Sol system and vanished into the dark between stars. They did not broadcast surrender. They simply left like shadows retreating from light. No one chased them. Humans had learned that some enemies are best left alone once they've been shown the cost of returning. On Earth, there were no parades, no victory banners. Too many names had been added to the memorial walls. On Mars, on Titan, in orbit, in quiet towns where families waited for calls that never came. People gathered in parks and plazas, not to cheer but to remember. They lit candles. They held hands. They stood in silence longer than anyone expected. Grief had a weight and it settled deep, but life went on. Factories that had built railgun turrets now rolled out water purifiers and solar panels. Shipyards that forged warships began assembling new colony transports, this time with stronger shields and better sensors just in case. Schools reopened. Children returned to classrooms, though some still flinched at sudden noises. Teachers didn't ignore it. They talked about courage, about loss, about why it mattered to protect each other. In a quiet moment aboard the UNS Resolute, now docked at the rebuilt Jovian yards, Commander Nate Ruiz stood by the observation window. Saturn's rings glowed in the distance, calm and endless. Lisa Grant joined him holding 2 cups of real coffee, rare now but worth it. "They think we became monsters," she said softly. Nate shook his head. "We didn't, we just remembered who we are," he meant it. Humans hadn't enjoyed the war. They hadn't glorified it. They'd done what was needed, then stopped. No conquest, no revenge fleet sent into hegemony space. Just defense, just survival, just dignity. Back on Earth, President Alan Ford walked through a newly planted memorial garden in Geneva. Each tree bore a plaque with a name. He stopped at one, Ares Prime Sector 4. He touched the bark and said nothing. He didn't need to. In Nairobi, cyber teams shut down the last of the emergency defense grids. The drones powered down. The jamming signals ceased. The world went quiet again, but not the old quiet. This was a different kind. Watchful, aware, but at peace. Dr. Owen Pierce and Lena Torres returned to their lab. Not to build weapons, but to heal. They turned Mirror's design into a medical tool, a way to safely disable faulty cybernetics in human patients. What had been made to destroy was now used to mend. That felt right. Admiral Carol Jenkins retired, not because she was tired, though she was, but because she believed the next generation should lead. She handed command to a young officer from Luna, who'd lost both parents in the first strike. "Guard them well," Jenkins said. The officer nodded. No words needed. Captain Daniel Brooks visited his daughter in Colorado. She was older now, quieter. She asked him if the stars were safe again. He didn't lie. "Nothing's ever completely safe," he said. "But we're ready, and that's enough." She hugged him. He held on longer than usual. Out in the belt, miners went back to hauling ice and ore, but their ships now carried small defense pods, just in case. Not for war. For warning, the lesson had been learned. Peace isn't the absence of enemies. It's the presence of readiness. The galaxy took notice. Other species, watching from afar, had assumed humanity would either crumble or become conquerors. Instead, they saw something rare, a civilization that fought only when forced, won without cruelty, and returned to kindness as soon as the guns fell silent. Trade ships from neutral systems began arriving again. Not with weapons, but with offers. Food, tech, friendship. Humans accepted cautiously, but openly. They knew isolation was weakness. Unity was strength. High Overseer Vractal was never seen again. Some said he died when his flagship systems failed. Others claimed he vanished into exile, haunted by the faces of the humans he'd underestimated. His name became a warning among the Cathar. Never provoke the quiet ones. On Mars, new domes rose beside the ruins. Not bigger, not flashier, just stronger. Children played in pressurized courtyards, laughing under red skies. They didn't know fear. They knew stories of people who stood when others ran, who built when others burned, who chose to be human even when hell came calling. And in a hidden archive beneath Cheyenne Mountain, the final transmission from Earth's High Command remained stored, unedited, unshared with the